Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first video of 2021. We're going to start off fairly light this year by admitting and dealing with some mistakes. I think it's easy to think that artists you see on the internet and like the work of don't make any mistakes. And perhaps this is true for some of them, but it certainly is not true for me. So to begin 2021, we're going to rectify some mistake that's been made with this piece right here, Kronos 3.0. Before dealing with a mistake, we have to accept that we've made one, and before that we obviously need to find out that we have made a mistake in order to accept it. For me, it became obvious that I had made some mistakes after I had dealt with transitions and shape design, which of course is a problem because now I need to redo those things, which kind of sucks. So what I noticed was that the upper body was too narrow, there wasn't enough depth to the ribcage, and I noticed this while observing from the side view, looking directly into the shoulder through the upper body. From this view, the depth of the ribcage turns into width, which is a lot easier to judge than depth. We can never really objectively judge depth, so it's best to never make decisions on depth, but instead change where you observe from and make decisions about width, also known as left and right, instead. With very limited reference, I kind of went off a feeling here, which is of course not so helpful to you. How can you know whether or not you have enough depth to the ribcage? Measurements of depth are somewhat unhelpful and mostly inaccurate. If you have the ability to make measurements, I would make a rough one between the C7 vertebra and the pit of the neck and use this as a gauge of the depth for the rest of the ribcage. I should mention again that this is not going to be a very accurate measurement and you should refrain from sticking to it religiously. It's simply a rough starting point. The other way you can do it is by using your eye to make a decision based on visual evidence. And I know that this is probably not very comforting to you out there. I understand that, but a lot of my decisions gets made based on visual evidence. Essentially, does this look correct? Does it look like my reference? Now we can search for more evidence once we reach the conclusion that our sculpture does indeed not look exactly like our reference. One big thing we can look for is, does the back feel flat while looking directly at it? This is once again a decision made somewhat based on feeling or intuition and not based on hard measurable evidence, but it can be very useful for a couple of reasons. At the end of the day, we are making a sculpture and it won't be a 100% accurate representation of our subject. So if we feel like our sculpture is flat, often enough the solution is to move the contours a little bit, even if it doesn't 100% represent our reference. By pushing the contours from the side view further out, we get the chance to have a more full turn of the forms of the back, leading to a back that will feel less flat while we are looking directly at it. More depth to the ribcage, moving our contours out, increases the range of values that we can achieve while sculpting the forms of the back. It increases the range in transition, giving us more options in how we transition one form into another. It gives us the chance to have forms exist with more varied topography. Some forms sit deeper in and some will sit a little bit further out. This is much more exciting and interesting to look at compared to forms all existing on a very flat base surface. So in other words, the contour impacts a lot more than you would perhaps think and is much more important than most are willing to accept. The contour being in the right place sets the stage for everything else falling into place. I think I misjudged the depth of the ribcage on this particular sculpture because of the twisting motion of Kronos' body. It can be a little bit difficult to judge depth in twisting poses because what we normally would do doesn't really work anymore. We can't compare the ribcage easily to the pelvis like we can in a more traditional pose with less of a twist. We can also run into the issue of the figure not looking right because of the twist. So sometimes we need to push and pull the contours a bit to make the figure appear a little bit more pleasing. As an example, from one view the ribcage will look really narrow in comparison to the pelvis, and the opposite can be true from a different view. So we need to tweak both so that they function somewhat well together from all viewpoints. Well, we don't have to do it, but I think personally that this makes the figure look a little bit better, a little bit more natural, even though it is moving away from the reality of the situation present on our reference. As I mentioned above, so much had already been done to the back on this sculpture. The transitions were worked out, the shape design was somewhat worked out, and pulling the contour out has the potential of ruining all of that, of course. As I said as well, it will give us the chance to add so much more. improve other aspects, which is a good thing. But I understand why someone would be hesitant to make these changes considering the work that's already gone into the back. However, if you've done it once, you can do it again, and usually things tend to work out better the second time. Or if they don't, the first time you made it work was probably just a fluke. I know that by rebuilding the back, not only will I gain the things I mentioned above, but I will also give myself a chance at improving things like the shape design a little bit as well, and perhaps even the transition. So essentially, look at it as an opportunity to improve your work, not a mistake that you need to fix. The process of improving this is going to be fairly simple and straightforward. For the most part, I'll use the information already available to me, information like the shape design and where the contours of the back sit in space, and I'll add clay on top of that and pull that information further out. I will use a very similar clay application to what I normally use. And this is more of a personal preference than anything, and dictating how you apply your clay is not really something I think will be beneficial to you. Apply the clay in a way that makes sense to you. Now you can try my way for sure and I'll explain it to you, but don't think it's the only way, because it is not. I like to apply clay in small snakes or sausage shapes. The reason for this is because with these types of clay marks, I can give direction to the clay that I apply. So my small pieces of clay start to say something about the direction of the forms they represent. The reason I find this so useful and valuable is because for me it becomes a lot easier to visually read the piece from a distance doing it this way. I can more easily see what it is that is going on by applying clay in this fashion. I guess it's comparable to drawing with lines and letting the lines follow the form, or draw around the form as they say, instead of drawing with lines always heading in a similar direction. Once I feel the contours are sitting where they need to, I'll use a wooden tool to blend the surface together, and I'll also add clay in between the forms to create a unified surface. It's more of a time-saving measure to wait for this step until I feel most of the clay is already there. If I spent time working on the surface and transitions while still needing to add clay, it would mean that I would have to reduce some steps. I like getting a full view of whatever it is that I'm doing before proceeding to the next step. Sometimes I cheat a bit and jump ahead for my own satisfaction, but usually I think that staying a bit patient is the way to go. Because of the way I laid down the clay, I can see what this is going to turn into, or at least I get a pretty decent feel for what it's going to turn into. So cleaning it up in order to see exactly what it is that I've done becomes a little bit less necessary. I've spoken about cleaning things up, pushing the sculpture forward in order to actually realize and see what you've done more clearly before, and I think this still holds true. But for me, this is a touch less necessary if I apply clay in the way that I'm doing here. To clean up the surface and do the transitions, I use a wooden tool and a rake tool. Now it's pretty simple stuff. Once the contours are in the right place, once the shape design is good, everything tends to turn out okay, at least, no matter how you deal with the surface or the transitions. People tend to focus too much on these last steps that I'm doing, thinking that anything is going to be fixed or solved here, and that's just not the case. If your contours are in the wrong place, you're simply going to be polishing a turd. Success is established earlier when you develop the contours and the shape design. And lately I've been feeling like those two will carry your sculpture much further and mean a hell of a lot more than how you deal with the surface or what tool you use, for example. So if you take anything away from this video, let it be how important it is to get the contour and the shape design right. Those two were the reasons I had to redo the back to begin with, and those two, the contours and the shape design, will determine whether your work succeeds or not. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to learn sculpture from me, check out my Patreon page. There's a link in the description below. I put a new video up every Thursday, So subscribe to see when that new video comes out next week. Click the like button if you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.